Mhm.
Good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome from Rodel and Partner. We are happy to take you through the Digital High Tea series, the third in the series presentation that we will take today. It is on changing landscape of permanent establishments. So we believe in the COVID times and the kind of unforeseen circumstances that have come up. There will be some of these aspects that may become relevant from business perspective. So we thought we'll take this topic and hope you find the discussions useful. So this is third in the series. The first two webinars are already there on our Rodel and Partner homepage as well as on LinkedIn. This will also be uploaded shortly on the Rodel and Partner homepage as well as LinkedIn page. So you may visit those. Any question and answers, we have kept specifically 10 minutes slot towards the end of the presentation. So you can put your questions in the chat box and go through those questions at the end of the session. So with this, I would like to start with the presentation now. And we will first take up, I'll briefly take you through the background and what we do for our clients, what kind of services we offer, what is the setup that we have in India as well as globally. And well, most of you will be already aware about Rodel and Partner, but there may be some new attendees, and that's why we thought might be we may just spend few minutes on this. So we move on to the next slide with this. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as you can see the agenda, we start with introduction. Then we firstly briefly take you through what is the permanent establishment, not getting into too much of detail, but we just give you broad idea what kind of and what types of permanent establishments that may get established. There will be a few case studies also, just to take real life scenarios, what kind of circumstances had led to establishment of permanent establishments and what kind of thought process that judiciary had in such cases. Then we'll take on multilateral instrument, which is OECD's project on base erosion and profit shifting, the culmination of that. So we'll briefly touch upon that. While I think I know many of the attendees may be belonging to the German corporation, but at the same time there will be few from other countries also. And as such, for Germany, so far MLI has not become applicable between India and Germany, but still we'll briefly touch upon just to give a heads up as to where we are headed in case MLI comes into picture. Then we'll also take you through certain evolving jurisprudence on the PE topic, because how the court is looking at it over the years, whether some kind of changes have happened in the approach of courts or in the approach of tax authorities, because of which the litigation may be still happening. So those aspects we'll touch upon. Then very briefly, we'll also update you on what is happening on attribution of profits, what kind of approaches are being used by for such purpose. So that we'll briefly touch upon. Certain challenges that are being faced by businesses on COVID situation, that also will take you through. So with this, I'll now start with the introductory part for Rodel and Partner. So we move on to the next slide. Yes. So as you know, Rodel and Partner is headquartered in Germany, and it was founded in 1977 as a single practice in Nuremberg. But now we are more than 5,000 people strong team, and we are spread across almost 50 countries with more than 100 wholly owned offices. So more than network, I think it is owned offices that are there, so that it gives a lot of confidence to clients about the capabilities of team. So it's, as I mentioned, one firm and there is no really a network firm or franchisee model that is being followed just to build confidence in the clients. So it is a one-stop shop for various services. So it may be any kind of tax and regulatory aspect, let it be legal, let it be foreign exchange management, taxation, accounting, audit. So all these things are catered and taken care of for clients, so that there is no need to kind of liaise with different firms. And we are definitely committed to German international businesses as well as businesses from other countries. Yeah. So we go to the next slide. So how we are placed in India? So while in India we had entered in 1997, and there was a team of experts that was there. In 2007, there was a formally presence established in form of Rodel and Partner India, which was based in Delhi. Next year, in Mumbai also, again a branch was opened, and in 2012, Pune market was entered. And this was a big success because we know a lot of companies from Germany and Europe are based in Pune, and that's why this office grew very fast. Now we also have offices in Bangalore, Chennai, Ahmedabad, and so in all there are 6 offices across India. Yeah. Uh, Going to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide. Yes. So we have more than 450 multinational companies who are our clients, and we are happy to serve them. The team also is more than 150 people that is there, which is a strong and stable team. We also are supported by the India desk in Nuremberg, so that we are able to connect at local as well as head office level and able to serve in much better and smoother manner. And there is, of course, a diversity of languages starting from German, English, Hindi, and some other regional languages which our employees are able to speak and as such connect to all levels of clients. Yeah. So we move on to the next slide. So this is the international presence that Rodel and Partner has across various countries. Yeah. So we can move on to the next slide. This is just a map. Again, same thing repeated on map. Next slide, please. These are offices in Europe, particularly other than Germany. So, there are in multiple countries, there are various offices that are there, and you can see the entire list and see on map also that most of the Europe region is covered. Yes, we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so in Germany again, there are more than 20 offices, and you can see entire map. All the places are covered, all the major places are covered, and we are able to serve clients from being close to the client place. Yeah. So with this and our success, there are key principles that we are interdisciplinary. As I mentioned, that while we have got different service lines, but at the same time, the entire all the teams work together as a project team. So we are able to take on any query, anything, and we are able to speak about all the laws which can be relevant to the client, and we deliver it as a single project. So not like one team is not speaking to other, and there is no coordination. So that is not happening, and clients are really benefiting out of it, so that they get 360 round perspective on any issue. There is a caring principle. We have a single point contact for any and every client, so that clients don't need to keep on coordinating with different teams. There is a international approach. So as we mentioned, we have offices worldwide, and so with our wholly owned offices, we are able to offer a much more kind of efficient client experience for this. And there is, of course, client-oriented approach that we follow. So, like we look at what is client requirement, and accordingly, we are able to serve on whatever could be relevant to the client requirement. Yes. So with this, we move to the next slide. Yes. So now this was a brief introduction, and now I'll kind of Now we'll start with the topic on permanent establishment. So my colleague Priyanka, who is from direct tax team and international tax team, so she will initially take you through the concept of permanent establishment and also run through some of the case studies for us. After that, I will take you through the uh, next part, which is more on what is the new trend. So what is happening under MLI, multilateral instruments, or what is the evolving jurisprudence. So those things I will take you through in the subsequent part. So let me right now hand over to my colleague Priyanka, and she can take us through the initial part of the presentation. Thank you. Priyanka, you're not audible. No.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chetan, for the introduction. I'll quickly take you through some of the basic concepts relating to permanent establishments in India. We'll touch upon what constitutes or what leads to a P, what are the types of Ps that are existing in Indian tax treaties, and what are the exclusions. And we also take up some case studies, which are real life situations encountered by foreign companies in India. Next slide, please. Okay, so firstly, I'll take a minute to talk about why this concept of permanent establishment is so important and relevant. Basically, because where foreign company is deriving any kind of an income from India, it can be taxed in two manners. One, on gross basis, on the other on net basis. The gross basis taxation applies where no P is constituted, whereas when a permanent establishment gets constituted, the income is taxed on net basis at 40%, which means that any profits that the foreign entity derives out of the permanent establishment or carrying on business in a particular jurisdiction, or let's say in this case in India, would be taxed on net basis, based on its profits that it derives from the jurisdiction, India, that is. What does this mean? This means that the foreign entity therefore is now, since it's constituting a P in India, it's required to undertake a whole gamut of obligations, such as maintenance of books of accounts, because eventually the profits are taxed in India. Therefore, books of accounts have to be maintained, tax audits have to be carried on, returns have to be filed, of course, in the other scenario as well. But transfer pricing compliance will apply. So there's a whole gamut of compliances that will have to be undertaken if a foreign company is constituting a permanent establishment in India, as opposed to when it's taxed on a gross basis, where there is no taxation or no PE is constituted in India. Therefore, it's important to know and understand why this concept needs, some kind of an analysis, or it needs to be, analyzed thoroughly before any business operations are planned in India, because accordingly, then the tax rate also varies. As we are aware that if the gross basis taxation, the rates are 10%, some treaties have 15%. And even in the Income Tax Act, more or less, it's aligned with most treaties, that is 10%, the surcharge says. Whereas as opposed to, when a P is constituted, the tax rate goes up to about 40%. And hence, therefore, this concept becomes relevant. Next slide, please. Okay. So these are typical situations that could lead to permanent establishment in India. This is aligned with most treaties that India has with a lot of countries, and Germany is also one of them. So therefore, we have fixed place P. There is a construction or an assembly P, an agency P, and a service P. Now, the service P concept is not prevalent in the German DTA, but it is present in certain the DTAs, like the Swiss treaty has it, the UK has it, US has it. We'll take a minute to talk about each of these P's, not in great detail, but just briefly. The fixed place P concept. Now, this is the first permanent establishment. Basically, it's said to be constituted when a foreign company carries on business in India through a fixed place of business, and the fixed place of business is at the disposal of the foreign company. Now, this disposal has gained a lot of importance in the past years, And my colleague Chetan will talk about a lot of controversies that surround disposal, so I'll not deal with it. But just briefly, it's not necessary that the permanent establishment has to own or the place should be rented. The disposal has to be looked at from the context of the business activities. So it could be a transient presence, but still, even if it's carrying on business to a fixed place permanent establishment could be said to be constituted. Secondly, the construction P or the assembly P. So it's rather simple. Simple as in the concept is simple, that if you have a project in India relating to construction, assembly, or installation or supervision. So any of these categories will lead to PE if the prescribed threshold is exceeded. The prescribed threshold in most treaties is usually 6 months. And in determination of the project threshold, what is important is the start date and the end date. Basically, you need to see if preparatory activities which have been undertaken before the actual project commences, whether they have to be included or not, whether they are in the nature of preliminary or preparatory. So there's a lot of controversy around that. The end date, which could be evidenced by, say, a test certificate or a clean acceptance protocol by the client, etc. There are multiple issues associated with, again, the determination of the P, like, for instance, whether there are multiple interruptions in between, like to fly in and fly out. What happens to that period? Whether it should get included, not get included. The time spent by subcontractors, again, it's usually included. So each of these aspects will have to be looked at. Secondly, the last point on the slide there is the multiple projects. So if you have different projects, then what leads to aggregation of the P period, or should the projects be regarded as individual projects? So all these are controversies relating to installation P, in particular in determination of the P threshold, will have to be dealt in detail when a particular contract or the project has been assigned to the foreign company. Moving on, the agency P. Now, this is slightly different from the fixed place concept or the installation concept, in the sense that you don't really have a proper project or anything that's going on, but it could be a person who is carrying on business activities on behalf of a foreign company. So basically, it's constituted when an Indian company, or say any individual in India, is carrying on certain activities which are listed in the treaties, and is also construed to be a dependent agent. So twin tests need to be satisfied here. One, the agent has to be dependent, and second, the three tests that are, or the activities that are laid down in the treaties, respective treaties, those have to be fulfilled in order to be constituting an agency P. Now, the first one is authority to conclude contracts. That is, the Indian entity which is acting on your behalf, whether it has the necessary authorities to conclude contracts on your behalf or not. This may not be exactly a de facto authority to conclude contracts. The signing authority may still be with the foreign entity, but even then you could constitute a P. We'll talk about these controversies in the later part of the presentation. The second activity is maintenance of stock of goods or merchandise, and lastly, securing orders. So all these any of these three activities, if you satisfy, or if you carry on in India, you could, the foreign company could constitute a permanent establishment in India, provided it qualifies to be a dependent agent, because independent agents which act in the ordinary course of business are excluded. So there are a lot of controversies around whether the Indian subsidiary doing agency activities for the foreign principal, whether it's got to be regarded as a dependent agent or an independent agent if it's carrying on some activities for its own customers, or it's exclusively doing work for the foreign entity. So all these aspects are relevant and have to be discussed and deliberated in detail, and we'll do that in the subsequent slides. The last P is the service P, which is not present in the German DTA. Basically, but like we discussed, however, is quite commonly found in a lot of Indian treaties, like the UK treaty, Swiss treaty, and then you have the US treaty, etc. Basically, it's where a P is said to be constituted in this case, where employees or other personnel, these personnel could be any, as in it could be consultants as well, if they carry on services, business activities, or provide services in a particular jurisdiction here in India, through for a specific period of time that is prescribed in the treaty. For associated enterprises, this threshold is as low as, sometimes 30 days, and for the US treaty, it could be as low as 1 day. So this is the concept of service fee. There are other variants like the manufacturing fee, where the manufacturing is carried on in India on behalf of the foreign entity, and the digital fee, which is again the evolving concept of the e-commerce disputes, which will be touched upon by Chetan in the later part of the presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so the earlier slide spoke about which activities constitute permanent establishments. Now, this is an exclusion from permanent establishments. So every treaty, rather most treaties would have certain activities which are enlisted, which are in those circle boxes, circles that you can see below, which are actually exclusions from the concept of a P. Basically, if you carry out these activities, you are not regarded as having a P in India, which means that, say, for example, in the first bullet, it's the use of facilities or storage or display or delivery of goods. So if this activity is carried on in India, if this facility is being used for storing goods, it may not necessarily be regarded as constituting a P, simply because it is viewed that these activities are so remote from the profit centric or the core business activity of the entity that it may not, it cannot be regarded as a core business activity. It's far away from the actual realization of profits, and therefore they are excluded from Ps. Again, this concept is evolving, and there are some controversies, with regard to how a particular activity is viewed, and we'll discuss them in detail. The bullet below talks about two situations in the context of these preparatory activities. So basically, if say an e-commerce giant like an Amazon or like any e-commerce tailor has maintained a warehouse in India for storing goods, and it has deployed employees. Now, if you look at the first circle there, it's talking about use of facilities for storage or delivery of goods. So actually, the warehouse that all these people are working in and the goods are stored in, it could possibly be categorized as being eligible for the preparatory and auxiliary activity. But however, since this business activity is so large, and the activity of storing and delivery to customers is such an important aspect of a e-tailer like Amazon or any other e-commerce player, it's not right to call this a preparatory and auxiliary activity, and therefore these concepts are evolving and will have to be looked at in the context of the business activities that the foreign entity carries on in India. The next bullet there down, as a variant to the above example, purchase of for a local office that is set up for market research. Now, if a certain office is maintained and if it's not doing any business activities, but it's just collating information or it's doing advertising or market promotion, what happens to the office? Whether it can really qualify to be a preparatory and auxiliary activity? The answer is yes, because the activity of the office as such is so remote, or it's so preparatory or auxiliary that anything that the office would do would be regarded as not constituting a P. But again, these aspects, like I mentioned before, would have to be dealt with or would have to be considered from the point of view of the business that the foreign entity has planned in India. This is not, these concepts are evolving because of the MLI and the jurisprudence that has evolved over the years, and we'll discuss them in detail in the controversies. Now, next slide, please. Yeah, go ahead. Next slide. The first case. Okay, now we'll talk about some case studies. These are, like we mentioned before, these are real life scenarios that we've seen our clients encounter. Basically, in this case study, the company is Japanese company dealing in direct sale of air conditioners and air conditioner equipments to Indian customers as well as to its subsidiaries. So basically, it operates an agency cum distribution model, which most Indian companies do adopt for doing business in India, or other foreign companies adopt for doing business in India. That they sell goods either through the Indian subsidiary, that is through a distribution channel, or they have a direct sale network with the customers, particularly those customers who would like to avail custom duty benefits For them, they prefer direct sales because of the export benefits that they have to avail. And hence, in those cases, the Indian subsidiary merely acts as a promotional channel, or it only acts as a service provider, providing certain marketing support services to these Indian customers. Now, the question that arises is where this kind of a fact pattern is prevalent, where the Indian company is doing its own business, as well as it's also acting on behalf of the foreign company for facilitating its sales. Now, whether this could lead to a permanent establishment in India if it is undertaking those kind of activities which are enlisted in the treaty. Now, here, this was actually the case of Daikin in of Delhi Tribunal, which is the lower tribunal in India, where it was observed by the tribunal that the Indian entity is not just acting as a sales communication channel, or although the agreement did say that. I mean, the agreement usually, the way we word the agreements, we say that the Indian entity acts as a communication channel. It is not allowed to enter into any kind of contracts on behalf of the non-resident and so on and so forth. However, the fact pattern that evolved was such that the Indian entity was essentially doing everything, right from negotiations to price fixation and so on and so forth. And the emails, were scrutinized and were checked to prove this, that it was not just acting as, passing on the price list, or rather, price quotes from the foreign company and paying or giving it to the Indian customers, but was rather doing the whole gamut of services under, the agreement that it had negotiated with the foreign company for the marketing support that it provided. And therefore, it was held that this entity, that is the Indian subsidiary, qualifies to be an agency PE, a dependent agent permanent establishment, and some parts of the supplies would be taxable in India. So again, this is a real life situation that a lot of, like I said, a lot of clients deal with Indian customers in both the models, direct as well as through the agency, and therefore one has to be mindful of the kind of activities that it undertakes under the agency agreements or the marketing support agreements that are usually entered into between the foreign company and the and its Indian subsidiary. Sorry, I'm rushing through the case studies because the time is short and we have to cover a lot. So I'm going a bit fast. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat box so we can discuss them at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. This is again a variant of the first case study where a multinational group typically gets a contract, or rather it's rather it establishes, say initially when it enters into the country or India for that matter, it establishes a liaison office to act as the communication channel, and then subsequently moves on to the subsidiary model for doing the marketing support activities that it undertakes. Now, this was a decision of the Delhi High Court in the case of GE. Now, GE, as we know, is a global giant which engaged in providing sophisticated equipment, supplying sophisticated equipment to Indian customers and also and worldwide, of course. So it established a liaison office as well as an Indian subsidiary, and the point that it made before the tribunal and the other courts was that it was merely acting as a communication channel. It was not really negotiating on behalf of the foreign entity. Again, akin to the case, the earlier case study that we discussed, essentially what happened in this was that a survey was carried on, and a lot of material was picked up by the department, for instance, emails, correspondence between the foreign company and the Indian customer, as well as the Indian company and the customer. Then there were appraisal reports, there were interview reports, there were a lot of things, there was a lot of material that was picked up, and there were express findings made that the Indian company was not just again involved in only passing on the fee codes or just talking about the price list, etc., but was actually doing everything. Like it participated in bidding. It was a part of the entire bid. The whole bid was structured and designed by the Indian entity. Indian entity deployed a lot of these high technically skilled and managerial people who were directly reported to the global CEOs, global CFOs doing marketing, at positions like sales directors, etc. And a lot of express findings were put into the court's order to say to prove that they were not just as opposed to what the agreement said, they were not engaged only into just acting as a communication channel, but were doing the actual negotiation work and finalization of contracts and also finalization of bid documents. All this led to a conclusion that the foreign entity had a P in India. And again, like in other cases, certain amount of profits from supplies was sought to be taxed in India. Even the LO, it was established that although the LO, was established for acting as a communication channel, but again, the activities were such that they were too, they were closely linked with those of the subsidiary, and therefore, even the LO was held to be, LO as in the liaison office was held to be a fixed place P for the foreign entity in India. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next one more slide. Yeah. Now, this case study is on assembly permanent establishments or construction Ps. Typically, the foreign company here has been awarded a contract for designing, supply, erection, installation, commissioning, etc. The whole gamut of EPC or contract that one gets for project in India. Now, the contract price, the way it was negotiated, it was supposed to be a composite price, no segregation between supplies and services. And again, the P was constituted because installation activity was going on for a period of 6 months or so. Now the question comes up is, in these kind of fact patterns, can one say that the installation P is involved in any way in completing the supplies of the foreign company? Because since again there is no segregation of contracts, etc., you have one figure as in the value fixed for the entire contract. Therefore, the question is whether some portion of supplies could be attributable to the activities that take place on ground by the P, the installation P in this case. Now, there were certain, so here in this case, it was observed that, the revenue found out that the project office was actively involved in clearing the equipment from customs. It was ensuring deliveries of the equipment to the site. It was also it was in charge of storage, it was in charge of insurance, transportation, everything. So therefore, it was concluded that since there is no, since there's first of all no bifurcation of consideration for any of these activities, and secondly, because the PE in India, the project office in India carrying on the installation work, was doing it in such a way that most of some part, not most, I would say some part of the supplies, completing the supplies, some activities relating to the supplies were carried on through India. Therefore, it held that some portion of supply should also be taxable in India. So, as we discussed in the first slide, the implications of constituting a P are far and wide because it could happen that the supplies which were otherwise not taxable in India, that's what foreign company would like to argue, right? That the entire supply has taken place from outside India. The whole consideration is devised in such a way that it gets paid outside India, and so there should not be any taxation for supplies at least out in India. However, because of the way the fact pattern is comes up, it so happens that the supplies also could get taxable in India, as we saw in the first two case studies on account of the agency P that was upheld, and in the third case study where it was established that the installation P or the assembly P was undertaking a lot of activities in connection with completing the supplies on the ground, and therefore the P, it leads to eventually taxation of the supply portion also in India, which generally obviously foreign companies would like to avoid. So with this, I'd like to hand it over again to Chetan, who will take you through some of the recent controversies and the jurisdiction, the jurisprudence that has evolved in recent years, and the various issues that surround the different P's that we discussed earlier. Thank you for patient hearing.
Thank you, Priyanka. That was very well covered. I know, like the permanent establishment topic is such a wide that you can even speak for 2 hours or even more than that. But I had given a very tough task to Priyanka to cover it in less than half an hour, and which she has managed very well. So now I will take you through some of the kind of upcoming trends. Like we know, like as Priyanka rightly said, there is a lot of controversy in the existing concept of permanent establishment. So we see a lot of judgments have come up, a lot of controversies have been resolved. But in the latter part of the presentation, I will also briefly take you through as to what could be even though there are so many judgments that have come up, even though so much of clarity has come through, why still the litigation is happening? What are the issues that now the tax authorities are picking up? So how the level of litigation is changing in the even existing scenarios? So that also I'll take you through. But before getting into that, I think it may be important to also look at what is multilateral instrument. So most of you will be aware, like OECD had undertaken a project base erosion profit shifting. Basically, the idea was that a lot of companies or a lot of multinationals are having kind of a lot of planning ideas or where what it happens is that the kind of laws are used in such a manner. It may be the domestic laws of countries or it may be the double tax avoidance treaties that are entered between the two countries. So provisions are of those laws and treaties are used in such a manner that they may not be taxed adequately in either of the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction where the income is earned and the jurisdiction where they are resident. So might be they may not be getting taxed, and there was a lot of apprehension that a lot of tax revenues kind of going away from the tax administrations, and so that's why this project was undertaken. Lot of suggestions were made, like what happens in case of dual resident entity. So the entity is resident in both the countries, or it is not resident in both the countries. Then how to deal with those situations? If there are instruments which may be giving a tax deductible expenditure in the form of say interest in one country, but the same income is treated as dividend or some other means in the other country because of which it is not taxed in that country. So you get a deduction in one country, you are not taxed in another country for the same income, and you have best of both worlds. So to avoid such situation, these measures were introduced, and to implement this, you cannot have bilateral negotiations between so many countries. Then the purpose will be lost, and that's why multilateral instrument was introduced. So we'll move on to the next slide. What was the background behind multilateral instrument? Yes. So the multilateral instrument contained various recommendations out of these BEPS action plans, and the countries were given options to choose. There were certain options under each measure or each action plan, and the countries were to choose whether they accept any particular option or they don't want to accept anything. So those kind of flexibilities were given so that countries can choose as per their own requirements. There were certain minimum standards that were set. So now this multilateral instrument, again, all the countries may not sign at the same point of time. So it was jointly, there was an initial level of acceptance by way of signing the multilateral instrument somewhere in 2017, in June 2017. And it was agreed that every country will get its internal legislative work done, whatever internal approvals or any other things that need to be done within the country to adopt such kind of document, they will be done. And then they will submit a document to the OECD saying that, okay, what options they want to choose, what are the reservations they want to make, and accordingly what will apply to their tax treaties with respect to countries. So that was to be done. And after that, this MLI will enter into force for a particular country. So so it was agreed that when first 5 countries submit it, that time the application of MLI will start for those countries to start with. So it happened in July 1, 2018 that MLI entered formally into force when 5 countries had submitted those documents, and after that cooling period was passed, and then the MLI entered into force. Now there are around 94 jurisdictions that have already signed this, and it is expected to impact around 3,000 treaties or more than 3,000 treaties between these countries. And it will not replace the tax treaty entirely, but it will give some additions or some deletions to the tax treaty. And so you'll have to read this along with the tax treaty, that okay, this is a particular clause of the tax treaty, so how it gets modified because of impact of MLI. So that's how it will happen. And India, of course, was one of the active members for this, or participant we said, because it is not member of OECD countries. So it is a participant in this, and it was one of the signatories long back in 2017. India has deposited an instrument of ratification, as we call it, in June 2019. After that, MLI has entered into force for India on October 1st, 2019. So there is a 3 calendar month period that needs to lapse in between. So if I have submitted in June 2019, then July, August, September. This is a cooling off period. After that, whatever is the first date, so it is 1st October 2019. And that's why 1st October 2019 is the date of entry into force. Entry into effect. Entry into effect will depend on the two countries. So it has entered into force for India. Now, same way, if India has chosen, say, country France, and France has also chosen India, for both, the entry into force has already happened. Then entry into effect will come into picture. So since India had submitted the instrument in in June 2019, and the MLI entered into force on in October 2019. So France, assuming that it had submitted the instrument much earlier and it would have entered into force for it much earlier. So the time period will start from India's entry into force, and then there are time periods given that when the entry into effect will happen. So again, there is some time lag given, because all the countries, all the companies or all the taxpayers need to be aware, okay, that these provisions are coming into picture, these kind of changes will happen. So they have to adapt their business situations, and that's why there is a time gap even for the instrument to enter into effect. And once it enters into effect, then those provisions apply. So as we mentioned initially, Germany has not chosen India as its partner for MLI. So that's why the India-Germany treaty is not covered tax agreement, and that's why MLI is right now not into force. But it will be certainly kind of in force for some other countries which are there. So this is just a basic understanding of few concepts. We can't really get into too much of detail. There is too much of about to talk about even MLI, but I think we'll go to the main topic again. So we can move to the next slide, please. So maybe I'll just take you through some of the key changes that happen if the MLI enters into effect, and the changes that are more relevant from the permanent establishment perspective, because that is the topic we are discussing about. And again, as I mentioned, this will only apply if India as well as the treaty partner both have chosen each other for this kind of MLI, and both have agreed to the same options. Then these changes will come into place. But if India wants to make these changes in the treaty, but other treaty partner does not, then the changes will not take place unless until it is a minimum standard. So minimum standards are different. We are not discussing them today because they are not relevant from permanent establishment perspective. So if you look at from PE perspective, then one of the changes that generally in the tax treaties used to have a word, and as Priyanka also mentioned in beginning, from agency PE perspective, if the dependent agent has an authority to conclude contract, then it will become a PE. Now, what is sought to be changed is that even if the agent is playing habitually playing a principal role which leads to the conclusion of contract, then also there may be a permanent establishment. Of course, the additional caveat is that this activity should, the agreement should get routinely concluded without material modification by the principal. So if Indian agent is paying principal role for conclusion of contract, but and also that there should be the contract should be concluded by principal without material modifications. So then this will amount to PE. So it may happen that in case of standard price list, etc., where agent is explaining the pricing to customer, or he's getting the inputs from principal and passing on to the customer. So those kind of situations may get kind of tricky, and we will have to look at those situations on case by case basis, whether these kind of changes, once they come into picture, whether they will affect the permanent establishment concept. Of course, in India, many treaties have securing of orders also as one of the activities which trigger the agency PE. And so the treaties where such kind of clause is there, probably there may be still already this kind of exposures will be there, but not necessarily that this clause will be there present in all the treaties. We move on to the next point, that is stricter definition of independent agents. So as we said, even if independent agent is doing whatever activities are mentioned, then he will not be regarded as dependent agent P. So if he becomes independent agent, the matter is through. Now, earlier legal and economic independence was given the weightage to say that if the agent is legally and economically independent, then there should be no, he should be regarded as independent agent. Now, what is added is that if he is working exclusively or almost exclusively on behalf of closely related enterprises, then he will not be considered independent. So this kind of clause has been added, and that's why again the chances are that where group companies, if the Indian agent is marketing for group companies, then chances of he becoming independent reduce, because there will be a specific clause in the MLI. Again, India's treaties had such kind of clause that okay, if he's working wholly or almost wholly for any particular entity, foreign principal, then also he may not be considered independent agent. So that kind of clauses were already there in India's tax treaties, and so this may again maybe kind of something similar, or like a lot of treaties, the clauses are already there to some which to some extent maybe in similar lines. Then preparatory auxiliary activities. So as Priyanka mentioned, once there is even if there is a permanent establishment exposure, but if your activities are preparatory and auxiliary, you will not be impacted. But now what is sought to be done is that those activities, specific activities, if they are in the context of your business, not preparatory and auxiliary, then you will still not get that exemption. Earlier, it was that if you are doing that particular activity, that you are storing goods for purpose of delivery, then you are out of the PE. Now that will not happen. That activity in the context of business that you are doing needs to be preparatory and auxiliary. So there is an additional caveat that has been introduced. Same way, anti-fragmentation rules. Now, what happens if you are splitting or fragmenting your activities between different entities, to say that okay, one particular entity is doing only limited activity, the other entity is doing limited activity. So in such cases, if you combine all the activities together, then it may be not constituting as a preparatory auxiliary activity in India, and that's why there may be a PE exposure. But because you are fragmenting it, you may come out of it. So to plug such situation, the provision is brought in that for anti-fragmentation, that you cannot fragment activities. Then next is the splitting up of contracts. So same way in construction PE, like as we looked at, there is a time threshold. So in India, it is typically 6 months. So if you are splitting up the contract in such a manner that no single entity is within the group companies, no single entity is doing more than 6 months work, but you are still able to do a more than 6 month project and not forming a PE. So such kind of situations will be avoided because of this splitting of contracts related provisions. So these are some of the relevant aspects from MLI for permanent establishment. We move on to the next slide. Right. Next slide, please. So we'll quickly touch upon certain evolving jurisprudence on some of these PE concepts. So like we saw that agency PE exposure typically arises where Indian entity markets the products for group companies. And typically Indian subsidiary in such many of such cases is regarded as dependent agent, because it is doing the business exclusively for its parent company or group companies. And India's treaties, as I mentioned, has such kind of provisions, not necessarily all treaties, but many treaties have such kind of provisions that if agent is working mainly for one of the entities, then, or the group entities, then it will be regarded as dependent agent. Then the clauses of the agreements are very well worded. They may be very tightly ring-fenced that okay, these are the only activities that will happen in India, which may be sales, promotion, communication channel, and not concluding or negotiating. All those kind of precautions are taken. But what happens on ground? On ground, you may be still doing those activities. The sales team may be doing that activity. So when the business starts, my sales team will not do that, and there will be a lot of dependence on foreign company to give a final touch or to have final negotiations. But over a period, sales team develops good rapport with customers. They become senior. in the scheme of things, and that's why they are able to negotiate better and get a good deal. But that somewhere now, my what team was not able to, would not have formed the agency P might be 2 years back. Now in 2 years time, they would be going to that stage, and that's why it becomes relevant. So even tax department also knows these aspects, that how these things work. Might be something may be written in contract, but might be there may be a lot of other things that may be happening on ground. So we have taken few bullets, like they look at interview or appraisal reports or emails of sales team, or they look at other documents like inquiries, proposals, quotations, purchase orders. They look at LinkedIn profiles. They look at internal documents or correspondence, and basis that they will form a view that whether there is an agency fee or not, because whether the contracts are getting concluded or not. And these are all bullets what we have taken are actually from live cases that have happened in India, where the tax authorities had picked up these points. Surveys is one of the ways by which tax authorities get this data. But even without surveys, they may ask you to submit, okay, if you are saying that, okay, foreign principal is doing the work, then show us the email communication, shows what kind of email trail is there with the customer. And at times, in these cases, what has happened is that the company was not able to prove that, okay, the foreign company was involved in negotiation, it was doing a front ending with customer, but lot of involvement of Indian company was there, and that's why they could not provide those kind of evidences. So these things become important. So moving on to the next slide. Yes. So even now in India, the rule is that, okay, whether the act or treaty, whichever is beneficial, will apply. Now what happened, we saw that, okay, the treaties are changing, the tax treaties have changed, MLI will come into picture for various treaties, and that will even make the things worse for companies. But what happens under the domestic law? Unless until you have a parallel provision under the domestic law, the changes that you make in treaty may not really work, because then taxpayers will say, okay, fine, I'll follow the domestic law and I'm better off because I can follow whatever is beneficial to me. And that's why there is a parallel change in the domestic law. So if you look at the bold bullet somewhere in the middle of the slide, it says what has been added is habitually plays a principal role leading to conclusion of contracts. So maybe the words may be some bit of different. So there is some difference between the MLI and the Indian domestic law, but at least principally they have brought in similar change. If you look at India's submission to OECD, then they have adopted the extended agent PE definition. So if so, at least if the other treaty partner is also adopting it, then in India the extended agency PE scope will apply. What we discussed in the earlier slides. And even one of the examples is the China treaty, where India has kind of amended the treaty and agreed on a new treaty with China, where also similar changes happened. So India, China has not gone through MLI route, but they have done a bilateral negotiation and come up with a new treaty. We move on to the next slide. Yes. So offshore supplies. So again, I think Priyanka discussed upon the PE's role in offshore supplies and why the profits may get attributed to India. So just to step back a bit. Now in India, typically if you look at the litigation long back, what used to happen, and might be like a decade or more than a decade back. So what used to happen, the tax authorities used to take an argument that, okay, offshore supplies, on-site services, both are linked to each other, because you cannot just do offshore supplies independently. You have to provide on-site installation services also, and that's why this is a composite contract. These are not separate elements, and that's why if it is a composite contract, even offshore supply should be taxed in India. Now they were able to establish the linkage, etc., and all those things happened. Courts also said, fine, this is a composite contract, but court said that fine, it is a composite contract. But what is happening in India? In India, you are doing installation services, you are taxing that. So you cannot tax offshore supplies just because you are doing installation in India, you are having a permanent establishment in India. And that's where, while you had a Supreme Court ruling and you had a various High Court rulings which were in favor of taxpayer. And basis that, it was now that issue should have died down. But it has not happened. Over the years, we still see that there is a lot of litigation happening on these issues. So what has changed? What change we can see is that the tax authorities have changed their arguments. Now they are getting into, okay, fine, like if you look at some of the sub-bullets in the box below. So they have said that okay, the profits, the split of consideration between offshore and on-site portion of contracts, that is not justifiable. You are loading too much of revenue in offshore supplies as compared to on-site, because of the on-site may have low profits or no profits, might be loss situation, and that's why the split is not correct, and that's why some profit from offshore supply should get attributed to on-site activities, and that's why it should get taxed in India. So that was one of the ways they could bring up the argument. The other was that while contract for installation is happening in India, but the permanent establishment is playing role in various activities that are required even in connection of supplies. Because when the supplies come to India, then there has to be a custom clearance, there has to be local transportation, there has to be storage till the time it is not installed, and the property in goods is still with the supplier. So all those things are taken care of. So how do you overcome that? Even the supplies also may not come in the same form, but it may come in a knockdown form. So you may have to do some bit of plugging, wiring, and all other things, screwing, etc. in India. So how do you take care of those things? How do you try to say that okay, while these activities will have to happen in India, but why they should not be attributed to permanent establishment? So a lot of contract-related precautions can be taken to at least overcome these challenges. So you cannot fully rule out the litigation, but at least what you can do is you can have your contracts properly worded and try and mitigate some of these issues so that the profit attribution risk can be minimized. Even some of the cases where foreign company and Indian company are jointly executing a project offshore as well as on-site, even the association of persons related risk comes up that tax authorities claim that these are association of persons and that's why they should be taxed in India. So these kind of issues are happening. So as we discussed, the judiciary has really kind of gone into these issues, try to settle some issues, but new issues are still coming up. Yeah, we move on to the next slide, please. So fixed place fee, service fee. Again, there is also some development, particularly in case of fixed place fee. There are judgments which are held at even 66 days of a business activity in India. There is even a couple of weeks of business activities in India have resulted in fixed place permanent establishment. The primary reason, and again there was a reliance placed on OECD commentary as well as certain foreign case laws, that while the activities for some period, but that was the only business activity. It was not like, okay, there was a significant business activity and some portion was happening in India, but it was the only business activity. So it was in case of Formula One race, or it was for golf related competitions. So those kind of cases, they are there for couple of weeks or couple of days. And those activities are fully happening in India. You are there in India throughout that period, and entire income is generated out of that business activity. Plus, again, it is a multi-year contract, and you have repeated such instances, and that's why in such cases it was held that there will be a fixed place fee. Even a new concept of virtual projection has also come up in some of the decisions. Of course, that decision was in favor of taxpayer, but the one of the dissenting members in that decision who did not agree to the final conclusion, but he was in minority, so his his view was not upheld. But the member, the judicial member who was in minority, actually mentioned that okay, there is a virtual projection of a foreign company in India because subsidiaries only working for and on behalf of foreign company. Foreign company is driving the things. They are fully responsible and they are even given a commitment that they will not even divest the stake in the subsidiary till the time they successfully complete the contract. So this is a very new concept. Might be tax officers will pick up this and try to create new issues. That's why we thought, while this is not finally upheld in that particular case law, but at least we can bring it to the table. Even in service fee also, again, there was a recent case law in recent years where there was a, while employees were working from outside India, they were considered to have a service fee in India. Now, in case of service fee, anybody will assume that okay, you have to have presence in India for a particular number of days. But now the judgment has gone ahead and said that okay, even if you are working from outside India, because of technological and those advancements, the concept needs to be read differently. So this is a one-off decision, really not too much of kind of this kind of decisions have come up, but this is something which is important to keep in mind. We move on to the next slide, please. Yes, employee secondment again. There has been a lot of issues and there are a lot of judgments for and against, particularly if the foreign employee is deputed to India, what kind of deputation structure we are following, whether it's on a foreign company's payroll, whether it's on Indian company's payroll, whether it's on dual payroll, if he's on Indian company's payroll, whether he will be having any kind of lien on his foreign employment, or his foreign employment continues merely for further social security. So there can be a lot of permutation combination, and this permutation combination are given rise to different judgments. So what factors courts have looked into is whether they have lien on foreign employment, whether they have the foreign entity is responsible for their salary, or whether Indian entity is responsible for their salary, whether it is in furtherance or what activities they are doing in India is taking care of some of the foreign entities' business interests. Like, are they looking at more from a customer expectation management, because foreign company is a customer facing entity, and if they have put those people in India to ensure that the work is happening properly, so is it really to take care of foreign entities' business interests? And that's why whether there should be a permanent establishment in India. So those kind of issues are there. And other correlated issue is that when Indian company reimburses salary cost of these people, is it a service that foreign company has rendered in India? If so, then the permanent establishment exposure is also there, and whether this service fee needs to be taxed as fees for technical services or FTS, those issues come up. So of course, like there was a Delhi High Court long back in 2014 which had ruled against the taxpayer, but after that there are a few decisions which are also ruled in favor of taxpayer, and so it is really important to see what contractual terms we enter into. Yeah. Next slide, please. Digital P or significant economic presence. So still this is, I think, very much in discussion. Might be you may also have come across a lot of international literature on this, that still OECD has not got a consensus. They are still developing the papers. In India, significant economic presence concept has come into picture, but that is still not implemented. But it primarily means that a lot of digital based activities are happening. So what is the footprint in India for such activities, and how it should be having tax, how it should give rise to taxation in India. So that kind of concept has been introduced in domestic law, but the thresholds have not been prescribed. That okay, how much digital presence should be there, what should be the size, etc. So those are not there, and that's why this concept is not yet applicable. Same way, tax treaties don't have this concept, and that's why even it will not apply there. But this was one of the action plans of the BEPS, or Base Erosion Profit Shifting Project of OECD. And so like this is something which is going to come, and even as we are discussing, like last few days only, there have been some discussion drafts that have come up from OECD, like more than 200 pages each. So that of course professionals will have to go through, and might be there, it will be a topic in itself to discuss about. But might be this is also something which is coming up on digital front. Yeah. We move on to the next slide, please. Yes. Yeah, next slide, please. So very quickly on attribution of profits. So basically, attribution of profits, like there is under domestic law, there is a guidance that if you are maintaining accounts of PE in India, then you can do as per the direct accounting, whatever profits are attributed to PE, then you can identify and offer to taxation. If you are not having such kind of direct identification, then the tax officer can do it based on what is the turnover, what are the profits and gains of the foreign enterprise, and what could be the other relevant factors. So that kind of very broad rule is given, and a lot of power is given to the officers. Even courts also have ventured into the attribution of profits. The percentage has ranged from 10% to 50-60% also in some of the cases. So it is really like anyone's guess. So depending on the case, what are the factors, some notional profit has been attributed. So there is no science really behind this right now. But if please move on to the next slide. If you so if you look at, there is a CBDT that had come up with draft rules, and the formula is very complex, as you can see on the screen. But it is basically giving the weightage to sales, to the number of employees, to the wages paid to such employees, and to the assets deployed. So it has taken these factors. Okay, what is the sales in India? What are the number of employees in India? What is the wages paid to them? What is the assets in India? All these things will be compared to the overall sales, overall assets, overall employees, which are relevant in connection with India sales. And this formula will be applied. There will be weightages, like sales will have 1/3 weight, number of employees will have 1/6 of weight, total wages will have 1/6 of weight, and again total assets will have 1/3 of weight. So it again becomes 100%. And then the formula will be applied. what we see is that definitely the profit attribution may increase because of this if we apply on some theoretical situations. But this is still draft, and there are a lot of kind of suggestions that have gone on this. Again, CBD has also looked at, the central body has looked at, and they have also given one of the things that they have mentioned is that if there is a global loss situation or there is a low profit situation globally, then even though Indian sales are profitable, we will not apply what profit you are generating from India, but we'll somewhere have some reference to those global numbers. So that kind of leeway they have given. Again, they also mentioned in those rules that if there is a subsidiary that you have in India and certain profits are already taxed in the hands of subsidiary, so they will be reduced when you determine what is the profit that is taxable in the hands of permanent establishment. So at least there are some things they are already thought of and they are factored in, but there are of course some more things need to be done. So that is how it is quickly on attribution of profits. We move on to the next slide. Some of the challenges that are there in COVID times. There are like projects have got interrupted. So what really happens? Whether now, so I was doing a project earlier, and now there is a temporary interruption. Now again the project will start. So what happens? Whether that interim period I need to count, because we know that there is a 6-month threshold. So really, whether you count only the period before it and after it, or you even count that period in between. So there was a OECD guidance, and it somewhere hinted towards that, okay, that interim period may not be excluded, but that was much long back. I think the travel restrictions have continued even after that, and now the situation is very different. That nobody would have expected that travel restrictions will be there in place for so long, and that's why probably there may be still an argument to say that okay, this interim period should be tried to be excluded, so that if that is the interim period is only resulting in permanent establishment, so at least that should be excluded. So those kind of arguments can be built up. Then there is a lot of remote working is happening. So now we know with technology, while earlier you were on site, now from remote location you will try to manage the project, you will try to guide and get the things done in India. So whether such remote work needs to be attributed to India or not. So those kind of issues will come up, whether they should be attributed to permanent establishment or they should be taxed separately as fees for technical services. So those issues will be there. There will be certain employees, if they are stuck in India, then what happens to their taxation? If there are any small projects that have got extended because of PE, whether they should be doing the compliances that permanent establishment has to do from the beginning, because they have become the permanent establishment now, and they would not have even estimated that because of this kind of situation, they will be actually forming a permanent establishment. Now, if they form the permanent establishment, how can they go back and do the compliances from past? So these kind of issues will come up, and I think we'll have to deal with them on fact-to-fact cases. But I think there should be some leeway that should be definitely given to such issues. Yeah. So we move on to the next slide, please. So this is the last slide. This is more on inbound secondment. So while we discussed about fixed price fee or the FTS taxation, but there are some other issues also that are linked to inbound assignment, where the employees are deputed to India, and there could be a lot of issues from legal, immigration, social security, foreign exchange management act, indirect taxation. So a lot of issues may be there. So those things are there. Might be just kind of just a reason why the deputation needs to be properly planned while deputing any employees on ground. With this, I think we now move on to the last slide. Yeah. So this is the end of presentation. I'm very sorry that I already exceeded around 10 minutes of time in my presentation. But I just thought I think it was very important that we don't really rush through the slides, but at least we try and touch upon them. The idea was really to convey the various things that are relevant and need to be thought of. Well, of course, you can't really cover everything in such a short span, but we just thought at least we should give you idea what are the things are relevant to be looked at, so that you can kind of you can decide if something is relevant in your context, how what kind of impact it may have for you. Do you need to have additional consultation, or you can really see that okay, fine, this presentation is good enough, and basis this you get some clarity to address those issues. Would be any happy now to take up any questions from your side, and would be happy to address that. Yeah, thank you.
Chetan, we have one question.
Yeah.
The question is, what if the direct business by the foreign supplier is less than 20%, and the Indian sales by the Indian subsidiary is around 80%. So the participant is asking for your views on agency P.
Correct. Yeah, I think it appears on agency P. So what we are
Yes.
saying is basically there is a dual model that is there in India. One is distribution model where Indian entity is purchasing the goods from foreign company and selling in India to the extent of 80%. And there is also 20% sale that is happening through agency activity. So that's what I think is the question. And yeah, Priyanka, you may correct depending on what is written over there. But I think otherwise this is how it appears. So in such case, there are, of course, I'll give you two perspectives on this, and then I'll say like how you can look at it. So basically, one thought process is, okay, since I'm having customers for 80% of my sales as third parties, and only my 20% sales are coming through agency activity. That's why I should be regarded as independent, because I'm not only dependent on my group company for this. And that is how one way of looking at it. Second way is that really, if you look at agency activity independently, then I am doing agency only for my principal, and I'm having this 20% sales only for my principal. I'm not doing agency activity for somebody else, and that's why looking at that activity independently, I should be still regarded as dependent. My distribution activity may be there, but that is something which is a separate line of business and really cannot be taken into account while deciding independence for agency activity. So this is also another view which is prevalent. Not too much of judiciary precedence available on this. Of course, there was one decision long back, but the facts were really different in that case because there were like post offices of India involved, the nationalized banks like Punjab National Bank was involved. So Western Union Money, Western Union case where this kind of agencies like post office, nationalized banks were involved to deliver the kind of checks on what money was getting transferred, that amount was to be transitioned to customers. So there these organizations were involved, and court had actually observed that okay, these are the agencies you cannot really count as dependents, because they are themselves are so big and all other things. But that was really even to some extent it was also because of the nature of presence or post or department being under the ministry. So all those factors were also weighing in mind. But if you look at an independent situation where a foreign company is having like having a business from foreign group company, the Indian subsidiary, then this kind of arguments, that kind of coloring will not happen. And that's why there is, of course, a risk that you may not be considered as independent agent. And that's why the activity test will still be very important. Again, if you look at the MLI, what we touched upon, and the relevant OECD commentary that got changed because of this MLI coming into picture. So those also to some extent go and even somewhere tilt towards the second view. That is, you should look at only agency activity independently. You cannot really count distribution also over there. So that is how it comes from even OECD, the flavor, and even they have given an example also on that lines in the OECD revised commentary. So, so it will be very difficult to say that you may not be really considered as independent. So it will be very difficult to say that you may not be considered as dependent. Yeah. Any other questions are there, Priyanka?
No.
You want to add anything on this? What I just explained?
No, I think you summarized it perfect.
Okay. Great. Then I think we are 15 minutes over our scheduled time, but I hope the audience would have enjoyed or would have kind of got good inputs. I believe. Any questions? Anything? Probably you can reach out to us. Our coordinates are given on the screen.
Chetan, one last comment has come in. A follow up to the same question. The participant is asking that what happens to the distribution business?
Right.
Should it be then? Is it? I mean, So do you recommend to change the business model to 100% distribution?
Right. So you want to touch upon? You have also done, I think, quite a lot on this, Priyanka. So you want to take this opportunity?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, fine. Certainly, I think distribution model is much better as compared to agency model. There could be some practical requirements, commercial requirements, because of which agency may be required in certain client situations, uh, like there may be some customs benefit that the ultimate customer may have, and because of which he may want, okay, fine, I want to custom clear it, and that's why I want to go with agency. Like you go through agency route so that I can directly purchase it from foreign company and I have some benefits on customs aspects. Or there could be some other situations, practical situations. So in such cases, also an attempt will be made that how does distribution model addresses some of those commercial issues, and you are still able to achieve both the objective that customer has, as well as the objective of mitigating the permanent establishment risk. Because as we mentioned, once the litigation starts, mind you may be able to establish your case, say, in front of the appellate authority. But really, it really depends on how much is the stake. Do you really want to concentrate on your business, or you want to go for litigation? That also, 1 year is open. There will be multiple years that will follow till the time there is some final certainty at appellate level. So, looking at all those aspects, it may be better that you look at distribution model as a option. Distribution, the risks are really mitigated. There may be some situations where like limited risk distributor. So some such kind of fancy structures you bring in, and there may be again some bit of risk. But otherwise, if you go with a normal distributor model where Indian entity is taking care of inventory, taking care of debtors, and it is doing the business on its own, that should be good enough. Yeah. Right. So I believe, I think no more questions, right, Priyanka?
No.
Okay. Okay, thanks everybody. It was really kind of pleasure to take you through these slides and to kind of explain these nuances. Hope you could kind of get what you had expected out of the session. But we are happy to address any queries you may have. You can reach out to us on our coordinates and look forward to interacting with you in future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.